This video is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about my two favorite things in the world, after TikTok videos of Aussie Shepherd puppies, of course. That's right, philosophy and art. What can I say? I was educated in the finest Florida public schools. And there's an intersection between the two that's been all over the media lately. Should art and entertainment be moral or ethical? It feels like recently media criticism has become super focused on the supposed morality, or lack thereof, of popular films, TV, books, and so on. This all led writer and critic Wesley Morris to declare that culture is being evaluated for its moral correctness more than for its quality. We've seen this exemplified in the media reaction to, say, Joker, which many were convinced would persuade people to dress up like sad clowns, land a guest spot on a talk show, and shoot the talk show host who they also have weird daddy fantasies about. Or, as Heather Ann Campbell tweeted, "Can't believe the end of Joker is Joaquin Phoenix turning to camera and saying, 'Now you do Joker stuff.'" In contrast, Adam McKay's Don't Look Up was widely applauded, but generally more so for its moral appeal that we should, save the dying rock we live on, rather than for its actual artistic merit. This led many to bristle at the implication that if you don't like the movie, you don't care about climate change. All of this has us wondering, does good art need to be moral? And when our culture debates the morality of art, are we asking the right questions? Let's dive into this totally not contentious issue in this Wisecrack Edition, Should Art Be Moral? Note, this is a different question from should we stop consuming art made by a moral artist, so we won't be discussing whether or not you can still listen to I Believe I Can Fly. But before we get into it, we want to thank this video sponsor, BetterHelp. Are you dealing with something that's preventing you from achieving your goals or that's interfering with your happiness? No matter what's wrong and no matter where you live, BetterHelp can assess your needs and pair you with your own licensed professional therapist. Thanks to BetterHelp's network of more than 20,000 therapists, it's easy to find the one whose expertise fits your specific needs. That said, it's easy and free to switch if you aren't a match. Once you're registered for BetterHelp, you can start communicating with your therapist within 48 hours. Whenever you send a message to your therapist, you're sure to receive a thoughtful and timely response. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions too. Now, BetterHelp is not a crisis line and it is not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online. Plus, it's more affordable than in-person therapy, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp is invested in your journey toward a happier life. So visit betterhelp.com/wisecrack to join the over 2 million people who have already taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. And when you go to betterhelp.com/wisecrack, you'll get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/wisecrack. And now, back to the show. Now, philosophers, critics, and artists have been debating the tension between art and morality since ancient Greek times. What's more, cultural hand-wringing about immoral art turning us all into unprincipled hooligans is nothing new. For much of history, art has actually been heavily controlled by each era's moral authorities. During the Middle Ages in Europe, painters saw aesthetics crushed by what scholar F.B. Chambers calls the Christian moral resistance, like the infamous Bonfire of the Vanities in 1497, where an incensed, fanatical Italian monk convinced mobs to burn everything he found heretical, from books to artwork to musical instruments, even makeup. It's theorized that famous painter Botticelli was even persuaded to burn some of his own paintings that were considered heretical. In the Renaissance, things changed a bit. Painters like Leonardo da Vinci defined their artistic duty as uniting aesthetics and morality into beautiful moral art. But the Enlightenment changed everything. The free-thinking, more secular era saw European artists largely emancipated from moral policing. What followed, as scholar Arnold Berlant writes, was an aberration in art's history, as artists finally became basically autonomous. Of course, this freedom left some disgruntled, and over the centuries has led to artists like D.H. Lawrence being taken to court over their art's supposed immorality. Though his publisher, Penguin Books, was the one on trial, and we can only hope Mr. Penguin was forced to take the stand. Critiques of immoral art have continued into the modern day, typically surfacing as moral panics over the art children are consuming. Rock and roll was going to turn the teens into sex monsters in the 50s. and the 80s and 90s saw major hysteria about violence in rap, video games, action movies, and so on. Surely, kids were being prepped for lives of crime. Of course, crime rates plummeted. Straight up plummeted in the 90s, but why let facts get in the way of a good old-fashioned moral panic? At the same time, there's been a recent reckoning with some of history's more questionable works of art. Take Birth of a Nation, which was once hailed as an astonishing feat of early American filmmaking. Today, it is better known for almost single-handedly reviving the KKK. And today, the tension between art and morality lingers. Artists aren't being explicitly policed by, say, the church. At the same time, they are subject to an increasingly loud court of public opinion that, especially on social media, is often quite critical of art's perceived moral shortcomings. Take the low-key hysterics surrounding the release of The Hunt, which reimagined America's political divide as hide and seek, but had shotguns. With all this, we think the real overarching question when it comes to ethical criticism of art is, does the implied ethics of a work of art affect its aesthetic value? Scholar Noel Carroll characterized the two main opposing sides in the debate as such. On one side, there's autonomism. This is the view that, as Carroll writes, art and ethics are autonomous realms of value, and thus, criteria from the ethical realm should not be imported to evaluate the aesthetic realm. This is also called aestheticism, and its adherents argue that art should be considered valuable for its aesthetic qualities, not for its ability to morally enlighten or improve us. As proponent Oscar Wilde put it, there is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. More commonly, moderate autonomism holds that it's possible to morally evaluate art, but it's just not relevant to whether that art is actually good or bad, aesthetically speaking. On the other side, there's moralism. This is the view that if a work of art has immoral implications, those implications contribute to its aesthetic defects. Therefore, the aesthetic value of art can be compromised by its immorality. Now, let's take a closer look at each side. Autonomism has quite a philosophical history. The likes of Hume and Kant believed that we have to separate aesthetic and moral faculties. Philosopher Francis Hutcheson considered those faculties distinctive enough to be considered like different senses, as in hearing versus seeing. Just like you can't use your ears to evaluate the crumb on this week's Bake Off, you can't use your moral compass to evaluate art. Kant believed that what we consider pleasurable aesthetically is our taste, and what we consider pleasurable morally is simply our moral feeling. In more recent years, scholar Clive Bell has argued that art, or at least visual art, needs to satisfy two essential features. It provokes a particular sort of emotional response, and that emotional response is the proper basis of its aesthetic evaluation. Once we've judged something as art, he argued, morality becomes about as relevant as a piano is to a pig. He notes that, as art is above morals, or rather, all art is moral because works of art are immediate means to good. Once we have judged a thing a work of art, we have judged it ethically of the first importance, and put it beyond the reach of the moralist. Under this view, you could judge Joker as a work of art for engendering the emotions of, say, fear, anxiety, or coulrophobia, i.e. fear of clowns that go bump in the night. This seems fair. Thus, Joker's moral message is rendered irrelevant and the work is beyond ethical reproach. As Bell puts it, we should liberate the artist from moral judgment. Then there's moralism, which has dominated for most of human history. Carroll notes that before the wedge was driven between ethics and aesthetics by Hutcheson and Kant, ethical criticism of art was common and thought of as totally appropriate. Prominently, there was Plato's criticism of music and poetry in Republic, which he believed was making kids naughty. His argument culminates with Socrates saying that poets, including Mother effing Homer, would be banned from the ideal city. In the late 19th century, Leo Tolstoy leaned into moralism, rejecting aesthetic theories that focused on beauty. He complained that upper-class European art got bad when it stopped being religious, and fretted that the resulting art directly corrupts people by infecting them with the worst and humanly most harmful feelings, chiefly of sensuality. And he never even lived to read 50 Shades of Grey. He draws an analogy with food. People may eat food for pleasure, but its real function is nourishment. Likewise, people may consume art for pleasure, but its real function is to communicate. Specifically, to communicate emotions. The more the art infects you with those emotions, the better the art is, so long as those emotions are the ones valued by Tolstoy's humanist brand of Christianity: deep religious feeling, horror at injustice, and so on. Moral virtue and artistic virtue become one and the same. Some moralists point to art that is pretty objectively morally troubling to support their argument. Triumph of the Will is a common example. Made by the Nazi state's favorite director, Leni Riefenstahl, the movie unabashedly worships Hitler and his ideology. It is, at the same time, an aesthetically creative and groundbreaking work of cinema. But moralists argue that any aesthetic achievements are sullied by the film's objectively shitty worldview. Now, nobody wants to be the guy who argues in favor of Triumph of the Will, but at first blush, we do feel like the autonomists make a good point. After all, didactic art with a moral worldview can have little aesthetic value. Take something like The Blind Side, which takes the morally correct stance on the question of, should we be racist, while at the same time offering very little in the realm of aesthetics. What's more, lots of good abstract art has plenty of aesthetic value, but has no objective moral value. Carroll calls the argument regarding abstract art the common denominator argument, and he finds it the most persuasive of the autonomists. Basically, we must be able to apply our criterion for evaluating art to all kinds of art. But as he explains, since it is the case that much art does not concern morality directly, ethics cannot be the appropriate criterion for evaluating art. If you can't apply moral judgment to every piece of art, that is, why should you apply it to any? That said, we see the moralist point when it comes to things like Triumph of the Will or Birth of the Nation, so we're left pretty torn. But before you despair, there's one viewpoint that offers a life-saving curveball, and it was given by writer and philosopher Iris Murdoch. For Murdoch, the function of the best art is to pierce the veil and let us see things as they truly are. But for her, this vision is inseparable from virtue. And to convey a truthful vision of the world, the artist needs to understand human virtue. Truth, then, becomes the real morality. Murdoch believed that the best art holds up a mirror to reality, including and in particular, moral reality. But if an artist wants us to better understand reality and morality, they need to understand it in the first place. Under this thinking, Triumph of the Will and Birth of the Nation can't possibly be considered great works of art because they don't show a true picture of the world. They're both functionally racist fever dreams. Philosopher A.H. Hannay takes it one step further, arguing that art can even push a society's morality forward. Art is then seen throughout history to be continually helping in the creation of new values, in the transvaluation of values, like how Get Out can make us think about the way white liberals contribute to systematic racism, or how Parasite can make us rethink inequality, or how First Reformed reframes the environmental justice movement to ask, should a drunk, horny priest blow up his church? Now, without committing to moralism, let's entertain the notion that the ethical content of a work is directly relevant to its value as art. If that's true, it's natural to ask whether a piece of art could help us see the world more clearly by openly depicting immoral content. Some widely acclaimed films about war and organized crime might fit the bill, or 90s rap that gave us an unflinching picture of what life was like in places like Queens or Compton. It's hard to imagine how Illmatic could have been improved by a cleaner, more unproblematic moral stance, or that The Godfather would have been better art if nobody had played pranks with horse heads. Philosopher John Stuart Mill said that he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good and no one may have been able to refute them, but if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. That is to say, if we only see our characters doing moral things, we never get to experience immorality in art, and we can't truly call ourselves fully morally engaged. That means there could be value in art that represents immoral activities if and only if it shows us a true perspective on the world as laid out by Iris Murdoch. And if it's a novel one, all the better, right? Of course, this is not without complication. For example, the film Scarface is, for many, a parable about how you shouldn't solve arguments with machine guns. But for some of the rappers featured on MTV Cribs in the early aughts, it's an aspirational tale, What are we to make of that? The honest answer might be that as an artist depicting morally questionable behavior, you do not and cannot have total control over how people interpret your work. What's more, morality can be relative. Thus, what does and does not constitute immoral art can be fluid. And that makes the task of morally evaluating these works murky at best. However, because immorality does exist in the world, portraying it truthfully could, paradoxically, be a moral thing to do. And what's more, works that, intentionally or not, display immorality can also be highly useful to engage with, even if they only reveal our own shortcomings. And we think evaluating the immoral virtue of art is perhaps the crux of this media conflict. People who criticize Joker don't typically believe that the film is endorsing the Joker's actions. They believe that the very depiction of those actions is dangerous. But if Joker shows wild clown antics for the purpose of, say, commenting on the scourge that is America's underfunded mental health care system, then could its immorality have a moral purpose? To go back to Wesley Morris, when we expect all of our art to be morally upstanding, there's a real consequence. He writes, "We wind up with safer art and discourse that provokes and disturbs and shocks less. It gives us culture whose artistic value has been replaced by moral judgment and leaves us with monocriticism." So maybe the real answer is that yes, art should be moral, but its main moral obligation is to be truthful about the world. In which case, art that shows the world's immorality truthfully is, a bit ironically, a-okay in terms of morality. But what do you guys think? Are the autonomous right that ethics has no role to play in evaluating art? Are moralists like Tolstoy right that immoral art makes us hedonists? Is morality in art really just truth? And if so, can immoral art actually be totally moral? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and be sure to stop by our updated Patreon page. And don't forget to check us out on TikTok. Clutch that subscribe button like it's Tipper Gore's string of pearls, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.